Rob Ford's troubles have cost him major support on Toronto City Council. Many are asking him to resign or take a leave of absence, while others seek to strip him of some of his powers. Despite it all, he's vowing to remain in office, work through the last year of his term, and then seek re-election. Can Ontario's capital city continue to function amidst this unprecedented craziness? And if so, what does this say about municipal governance in Canada? Joining us now to help answer that, Dennis Pilon. He is professor in the Department of Political Science at York University. Nice to have you back here at TVO.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, let's start with this business about the two Toronto City councillors who are trying to, as we suggested in the opening there, put forward a motion to remove some of the mayor's powers, for example, to put whom he wants on the city's executive committee. If that were to happen, what exactly would the mayor be at that point?
Well, I think people need to understand that the model that we use in Canada is called a weak mayor system. So we have a directly elected mayor, but they don't have a lot of power independent of council. Many people characterize our mayors as just another vote. Now, in Toronto, the mayor does have some independent appointment powers, and he can move his issues up the agenda more easily than others, but really not a lot of extra perks for being the mayor.
He does set the agenda, though, for council meetings, doesn't he, and for executive committee meetings?
Well, for his executive committee meetings, definitely. But again, so that he has some power, but not a lot. I mean, if you compare it, for instance, to the strong mayor systems in the United States, someone like Michael Bloomberg in New York City, I mean, they run an administration in the same way that Obama, runs his administration. He is the government.
Yeah, he can veto.
But he can also initiate a great deal. I mean, when he needs money, he has to go to Congress. Now, that's obviously different than the Canadian system, where our executive is lodged within the legislature at the provincial and federal level.
We have been, I guess, through the course of the revelations of the last several days, I guess lots of people have been thinking, what can a city do at this point to get rid of a mayor that it thinks is out of control and doesn't want anymore? What's the answer to that?
Well, under the current rules, they can't do anything. Unless he's charged and convicted, he's going to stay there. So, some people have mooted a few ideas. Could we have recall legislation? Some people have suggested that. I mean, to me, this is kind of part and parcel of the problem when you have a mixed system like we do. We have inherited and mixed elements of the British approach to local government with the American approach. So we have a weak mayor system, which puts the power in council, like the British, and yet we have a directly elected mayor, not like the British until recently, and we expect that mayor to represent the city in a way that's different than the local councillors. So this is a system that's kind of ripe for conflict, and it's interesting that for the most part, we haven't had that much conflict using this system in most places.
Well, this is unprecedented, what's going on right now. So perhaps it's not surprising that the screams for recall aren't there. What do you think of recall, incidentally?
I think it's the wrong way to go about it. I mean, you're going to initiate a lot of cost to have a recall campaign. Wouldn't it be better to get the system right up front? If we want to keep a directly elected mayor, I think it was a mistake to move from a 3-year term to a 4-year term, precisely because it's a fixed election date at the municipal level. 3 years was a better idea rather than 4. The argument that people made about moving to a 4-year system was, well, it'll be like our provincial and federal houses, but they're not the same. At the federal level, the government can fall. At the federal level, a leader can be moved out if enough people are unhappy with them. Whereas with a directly elected mayor, you're kind of stuck with them.
What do you think about the argument that if you had recall, meaning presumably after a whatever period of time, 6 months, whatever, if the people didn't like the job the mayor was doing, they could launch a campaign to get rid of the mayor. One of the arguments I've heard is that absolves people of their responsibility to think hard about their choice on election day and get it right on election day. What do you think of that argument?
Well, again, I think the problem with the recall is it's a negative move instead of a positive one. I think that what we want is a democratic experience which says to people, get out there, express yourself, try to get the government or the influence that you think we should have, and then let's have people work it out in council. I mean, look, if I had my druthers, I'd say let's scrap the way we do it, have a proportional system to electing our council, precisely so that elections happen, but the deliberation doesn't end there. Precisely so that the politicians continue to work with the public to move the issues forward. The problem with our system is the politicians get elected and then a lot of them stop listening. And really, there's very little the public can do. They get one vote now every 4 years, and everything they want is riding on that vote. Absolutely everything they hope. And politicians get elected, and then they take those votes for granted and do any number of things.
One of the expressions we hear all the time is that municipalities are creations of the province, meaning the province has the power. And in this case, some people are saying the province ought to, in some way, shape, or form, intervene, either through any number of different mechanisms. Would you advise that?
Absolutely not. Churchill said that democracies, I can't remember the exact quote, but it's like,
it's the worst form of government except for everything else.
And I would agree with that. Our system may not be working, but I would rather leave the decision with the people, however flawed the decision-making process is, rather than have politicians go in and decide over the heads of the public that this guy's not doing the job. By all accounts, many in the public are prepared to grant Ford credit for the work that he's done as a politician on the issues. They just don't like his bad behavior. It doesn't appear that some of them are prepared to punish him.
The politics of this are somewhat problematic insofar as there's a Liberal government at Queen's Park and Ford is clearly a Conservative. Are the optics of a Liberal government intervening on a Conservative municipally just a bridge too far?
Again, I think that the politicians, even if it were a Liberal, would be very reticent to move on this, precisely because he did have a significant amount of support. I mean, 46%. Okay, a majority of Torontonians didn't want him, but a lot did. Mm-hmm. So politicians are, that's the third rail. You don't want to touch that because you yourself are going to go back to the public and ask for a mandate to introduce the different things that you want to do.
Well, what about this? What about the province changing the provincial law, the City of Toronto Act, to enable the city councillors themselves to do what they feel is necessary? Maybe sanction, suspend, kick out, whatever. How about that?
I don't want to let the city council off the hook. There's a lot they can do right now, and they could have done it a long time ago.
Like what?
The movement to defang the mayor, as we're hearing people characterize it, by taking away what few powers he has that are distinct from other councillors. Make the mayor just another councillor. Sure, he's a councillor at large. We used to have mixed systems here in Canada where people were elected in a local riding and then a number of councillors were elected at large to represent the city as a whole. Maybe that's the role that the mayor plays, rather than having some kind of privileged position. I think the councillors could have intervened long before this to take leadership. If they didn't like what the mayor's doing, they could have done it, but they couldn't agree amongst themselves.
Okay, but you've already pointed out in a weak mayor system, his fangs are pretty short to begin with. So if you defang a guy with short fangs already, you're not doing a heck of a lot. What about the idea of the municipal affairs minister at Queen's Park initiating a process whereby you amend the City of Toronto Act so that the city councillors themselves can kick the guy out if they want him out?
Well, they have different bases of support. So I think immediately people would cry foul and say, this person is elected on the basis of a local area to represent, I guess, those local interests. That's what people would say. The mayor has an agenda that encompasses the whole city. So to have the council basically throw the mayor out, some people would say, if that's dirty pool. That's not really consistent.
Well, presumably there'd be a threshold you have to cross, and presumably that threshold's been crossed, hasn't it?
Well, maybe the threshold itself needs to be the issue. Maybe you'd need a 2/3 majority on council to make such a change. I mean, look, if we don't think the mayor-centric approach is the right way to go, then maybe we should just get rid of the mayor. Why have a mayor? Many localities around the world have elected councils that basically elect a mayor from amongst their ranks. Many of the directly elected presidents around the world are largely symbolic posts. In England, the mayor is a symbolic post. So, yeah, I've always sort of thought that this focus on the great leader who somehow will lead us, out of the wilderness is a bit superficial democratically.
Do you think there's something in the water these days in places like Toronto and Montreal and London where there is a mayor in office at the moment who's been charged and yet who has not stepped aside? He's going to continue to serve the end of his term. Mayor Ford hasn't been charged, but his behavior has been controversial, let's put it that way. As of late, Montreal has seen 2 mayors resign from office under a cloud. What in heaven's name is going on?
I think that we may just be finding out more of the kinds of things that had always been going on. So in the case of Quebec, it would appear that the corruption that's being discovered is not new. It's just we're finding out about it now. And we could look, for instance, at some of the things that are going on in the Senate. And there it's just shifting the goalposts. I mean, the Senate always was a place where politicians, parties put their money fixers. That's where the bagmen went. It was a way of giving them an income while they went out and rattled the chains to get money for the party. Now people think that that shouldn't happen. Okay, but don't pretend that that's not what the Senate was for, because that's what it was being used for before.
But I remember 20 years ago, I think it was, maybe it's 25 years ago, there was a 2-year term on city council. And then they decided they wanted a third because they were a more mature level of government and they felt they needed more time, and so they got a third. And then they decided they needed a 4th year. Some of them decided they needed a 4th year, and I think it was the Harris government that gave them that 4th year. So they're now on a par with other levels because they don't like to be referred to as the junior level of government. They feel they're as legitimate and as important to people's lives, as they are in some respects, as any other. But you really got to scratch your head lately. I mean, they're acting like they're really acting badly, a lot of them lately, aren't they?
Well, I would agree, and that's why I think the move...
But we have no recourse.
Well, that's where I think a 3-year term was a better form of recourse. Precisely because it's a fixed election date, a 3-year term gives people a chance to comment on the politicians more regularly. And also, because there isn't a party system, it's very hard for the public to keep track of who's responsible for what. Again, a 3-year term, I think, increases the accountability. The 4-year term was a mistake.
It was a deal. I remember. It was a deal. Voter turnout, as we know, stinks. Municipal voter turnout is chronically less than 50%. I think last time it was a little over 50, just because the personalities involved in this city anyway were really quite extraordinary. What effect do you think these scandals will have on voter turnout a year from now? And we're going back to the polls less than a year from now, actually.
Well, generally, we know from the study of politics that scandals and negative politics turn people off. However, this is a particular case. And in this case, because Ford is such a polarizing figure, and because he appears to inspire such a considerable amount of loyalty, I think that it will inspire some of those supporters to come back. The last election was obviously motivated by a number of proximate issues. The garbage strike probably motivated a number of people into politics who don't normally participate. They may fall off the voting wagon. And then I think the performance of David Miller left a lot of progressives discouraged, and they may have stayed home. They'll come back in the next election. The other factor is the funders. These politicians don't get elected without money, and I think some of those funders are going to say, can Rob Ford still win? When people look at the coalition that elected Rob Ford, they only ever focus on the Ford Nation. But the Ford Nation doesn't comprise all of the people that support him. There's a lot of just conservatives, right-of-center voters, who don't buy into the populism, but nonetheless said, who's the guy who can win? And he was the guy who looked like he could win.
And they liked his agenda.
Oh, sure.
They thought his center-right agenda was right on.
Yep.
Does this reflect, though, I mean, in some American cities, I got to believe that if what was going on here were going on there, there'd be 5,000 people in front of City Hall protesting the next day saying, we got to get rid of this guy. We saw a few hundred people at City Hall the other day. Now, I know another demonstration's coming up, but do you think the public's too apathetic on this?
Again, I think public mores are changing. We've seen a number of candidates throughout the U.S. and Canada who've emerged from scandals and managed to get themselves reelected. So I think it's the character of the scandal. I think it's also the character of the individual. You know, if this was someone who had never had any issues before, I think the public would be shocked. But they're not that shocked at Rob Ford. He's inoculated us against shock because he's always been a shocking politician. So some people might say, well, what did you expect? We didn't expect this, but we probably expected something like this because he's always delivered that kind of stuff in politics.
Dennis, thanks for coming in and sharing your views on this. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Dennis Pilon, York University.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.